If you've been following the channel, then you know that one of my biggest issues with the Bible and Christianity is the existence and perpetuation of the devil or Satan by God in this earthly experience. Some creators in this space repeatedly attack slavery or the resurrection claims or biblical prophecies or the genocides or evolution versus creation or the scriptural contradictions and those sorts of things. I've touched on all of those things as well. But the Satan narrative is the hill I will die on. The thing that ultimately led me to walk away from the faith was and is the whole ridiculous Satan narrative. And I know Christians have innumerable ways to frame this topic, some very literally, others metaphorically. And that, of course, is a major problem because it opens the door for confusion and ambiguity. Is it literal or metaphorical? And why? As you all know, I came up in mainstream American fundamental and evangelical Christianity, which teaches the Satan narrative as literal, meaning there's a real character named Lucifer who is our Satan or the devil, and he's active in our existence. And by the way, very few pastors and apologists have actually studied the history and mythical development of Satan in ways Bible scholars like Elaine Pagels and others have. Even just a simple glimpse into the contrast between the way Satan is depicted in the Old and New Testaments is revealing. Brandon at Mindshift does a pretty good job breaking this down in some of his videos, so I'll leave that to him. And Bible scholar Dan McClellan gives us a good breakdown of how Satan in the Old Testament was actually appointed to God's heavenly council. He's got videos on this. Say what you want about these folks, but at least they've actually looked into it. Many Christians don't know the scholarship around all this, but once you do know it, then you go back and reread the scriptures, especially the first couple of chapters of Job. It's all too easy to see, and the only reason you missed it in the first place is because you've read the scriptures with presuppositions to fit a particular false narrative and specific rhetorical goals. But continuing on with what fundamental evangelical Christianity teaches us about Satan, which literally means adversary or accuser, he prowls around looking for people to devour. He steals, kills, and destroys. He is the father of lies. He is evil incarnate, or at least in spirit. He has access to our hearts and minds. He has the supernatural ability to somehow manipulate and influence our thoughts away from God. He's our real enemy, a real threat, and we must always be on guard against his fiery darts, evil attacks, and deception. He wants us in his camp because he hates everything about God, and his mission is to destroy you, me, and all of humanity. He's proud, arrogant, defiant. In the broader narrative, he's God's central antagonist. He's the exact opposite of everything God is. He is the serpent in the garden. He's the beast in Revelation. He's the puppet master of the Antichrist. He's Jesus' tempter in the desert. He can possess and he can manifest through things like music and media, spreading his messages of selfish hedonism. He perverts God's supposed truth. He can masquerade as an angel of light, and I did a whole video on why that's a problem for Christianity. He was at one time heaven's greatest angel and its most prized musician, or so the tales go. His whole mission, which started in the garden, is to get all of us to doubt God, to question God. And real quick, for anyone new here, welcome. I am H.G.Roberts, deconverted Christian after 25 years, and author of On Monsters and Phantoms. And here on this channel, we talk about religious harm and trauma and how the Bible itself ties us up in knots, leads to confusion, anxiety, fear, doubt, depression, emotional oblivion, mental paralysis, and ultimately, of course, trauma. I have a master's degree in mass communication, so I'm specifically interested in the messages that the Bible communicates to us today, the cognitive filters in our minds that we use to interpret those messages, and finally, the harmful impact those messages have on ourself and our worldview. Many Christians have told me that my channel is the work of Satan, and I get that Christians interpret Scripture very creatively to arrive at some of these definitions and characteristics of Satan, and in some ways they also rely on what church fathers, traditions, and epic poetry like Milton's Paradise Lost have told us about Satan. So now that I've defined our terms today, I've got a clip from a recent Trent Horn video titled The Moral Madness of Atheism. In the clip, he's not talking about Satan, but rather why we can and should trust that God's objective morality is perfect, trustworthy, and good. Is that true based on what we know about Satan? We'll put it all together. My main question is, how do Christians defend the existence and perpetuation of Satan in our earthly experience? The only reason he exists is because God allows him to, and dare I say, needs him to, for his salvation-damnation paradigm to work. And I know that Christians can only hope the free will defense can make sense of this and justify why God allows it, but it doesn't make sense, and we'll break that down too. Okay, here's Trent.
God's commands are good not because he's powerful, but because he is perfect by nature. That's why the Catholic Catechism says, God's almighty power is in no way arbitrary. In God, power, essence, will, intellect, wisdom, and justice are all identical. Nothing, therefore, can be in God's power which could not be in his just will or his wise intellect.
There's more I'm going to show you from Trent in just a sec, but I just want to jump in here and say that in order to have a discussion about objective morality stemming from a perfect God, somebody please define what we mean by perfect. Standard definitions of perfect are having all the required or desirable elements, qualities, or characteristics as good as it is possible to be. Trent and others have called God a maximally great being based on this definition. Other definitions are free from any flaw or defect in condition or quality, and faultless and precisely accurate, exact. So until someone offers a better definition of what a perfect God means, and maybe Christians would add something like able to judge fairly and execute appropriate punishments in accord with the crime, stuff like that, then these definitions of perfect pose some serious problems with God and his objective morality that we'll get into, especially in light of why we have and need a Satan. And perhaps you prefer the word holy rather than perfect. Well, same problems arise that we'll get into. A basic definition of holy is spiritually perfect or pure, untainted by evil or sin, sinless, saintly. Okay, back to Trent.
Now consider this objection from atheist Walter Synod Armstrong. Even if theism is true because some God exists, that God still might not be loving, generous, just, faithful, or kind. Except God, by definition, has all great-making properties, including the morally great-making properties. This fact is not arbitrary. It flows from God's identity as the foundation of all reality. St. Thomas Aquinas said that the reason God is the cause of all existing things and causes all potential things to be actualized is because God just is existence. He just is pure actuality. Creatures receive existence from others, but God just is existence. And if God is pure actuality itself, or perfect being that lacks nothing, including not lacking the virtuous responses to all states of affairs, then God must be perfectly good, because evil is not a positive thing. It is an absence of good or a particular good. God's goodness is not an arbitrary fact about him. It flows from God's nature that is established in the cosmological arguments I mentioned earlier as the perfect act of being itself. Now, there are objections to the privation view of evil, and I'd recommend David Oderberg's book, The Metaphysics of Good and Evil, to address them. And to bring this episode full circle, C.S. Lewis had a similar view on evil when he said in Mere Christianity that goodness is, so to speak, itself. Badness is only spoiled goodness. And there must be something good first before it can be spoiled.
A lot to unpack here. I've heard all the arguments, or maybe not all, but certainly a lot of them, and certainly the core of them, establishing God as good or goodness itself in light of all his great-making properties flowing from the fact that he is maximally great or perfect. And I've even heard the argument that in light of this, God's allowance of evil and suffering, if it eventually leads to some measurable greater good in the future, can be considered good. Followed to its logical conclusion, none of us can ever say that anything is bad or evil if a sovereign, omniscient, omnibenevolent God has used what we'd call a bad or evil circumstance to bring about a greater good. How can that bad or evil circumstance not also be considered good, since it was allowed and maybe even orchestrated by a maximally great, perfect being who can do no wrong or evil, according to mainstream fundamental and evangelical Christianity, and whose objective is always eventual greater goods. After all, God tells us in Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. The "for those who love him" clause notwithstanding, any God-orchestrated circumstance along a God-orchestrated chain of events leading to an eventual greater good must be considered good as well, since a perfect God in his sovereignty and omniscience works or orchestrates those circumstances. So, this framework negates the concept of bad or evil, even though in Isaiah God claims he is the author of evil. I'll just pause here and say that if you accept the demiurge concept in Christianity, I think we have way less problems to sort this out. Most Christians don't know about this concept, and if they did know about it, they likely reject it. Real quick, related to Christianity, the demiurge concept comes from Gnosticism and texts like the Gospel of Judas, not necessarily the Bible canon we have today. Gnostics saw the demiurge as an ignorant, arrogant craftsman god, often linked to the Old Testament's Yahweh, who created the flawed material world, contrasting with the true transcendent good God revealed by Jesus. This demiurge is seen as a lesser, sometimes malevolent being responsible for humanity's imprisonment in physical bodies with divine sparks trapped within, needing gnosis or knowledge to escape to the spiritual realm. That's a very quick overview. You can delve more into that topic and second century figures like Marcion, who helped popularize this demiurge idea, on your own if you'd like. But to be sure, Trent's position as a Catholic is not one of Gnosticism and the demiurge. Mainstream Christianity teaches that one supreme God created everything ex nihilo, out of nothing, and the world was originally good, with imperfections arising from human sin, not a flawed creator. That begs the question, where does Satan figure into all that, and why? Okay, after that quick detour, let's merge back onto the highway and pick up where we left off. Any circumstance we deem as bad or evil is not. It's simply an occurrence along a chain of goods that eventually leads to an ultimate greater good, according to a perfect, sovereign God. Tell that to the mother whose daughter is kidnapped and raped, that God's got an eventual greater good in mind from that. So don't call her daughter's kidnapping and rape bad or evil. I know. Some pastors, apologists, and theologians actually do use that defense as a way of comforting a grieving mother. Stay with me, though. Let me bring this closer to home. An example I've used in the past, and forgive the vulgarity of this, is that God allowed my male predator when I was 7 to molest me repeatedly, so that one day the guilt and shame my molester experienced from that, assuming he does feel guilt and shame, might lead him to repent and turn to Christ for forgiveness, whether he extends remorse and sorrow toward me or not. And my molester's salvation, derived from his despicable acts decades ago, is an ultimate greater good, regardless of any collateral damage that happens along the way, like my deconversion from Christianity as a result of religious trauma, which flowed directly from being molested as a child. I know, it hurts our brains to frame it like this, but I'm playing by Trent's rules here, maybe even Christianity's rules here, in defense of a supposedly maximally great being who is capable of only great-making properties and eventual greater goods. That's how this has to work within that model. This raises the question, does God weigh a person's salvation as better than the loss of salvation in one of his chosen? Would he trade one saved soul for one lost? Is he happier about my molester coming to know Christ than he's sad that I've rejected him? Most of you do not have to contend with these thoughts and questions, but because of the hand I've been dealt, I do. And Christians, I suppose my mission is to bring these issues and questions to your attention to make you at least pause to consider them as you bludgeon us over the head about how good and loving this God is, how perfect he is, to use Trent's word, maybe even how holy he is. Let's dive a little deeper in response to what Trent has said. When it comes to the moral argument for Christianity, I often think we're asking the wrong questions about morality. Maybe not the wrong questions, but I wonder if there are better questions we can ask, better ways we can argue against this idea of objective morality handed down from a supposedly perfect God. Is it morally wrong to sustain a world where evil exists and that evil does in fact lead a majority of souls to hell? Is it wrong to sustain a fallen world versus correct it immediately? Was it wrong for God to allow the deceiver into his perfect garden, knowing the outcome, an outcome God was perfectly in control of, which amounted to God, not Satan, cursing us and the planet? Is it wrong for a maximally great and perfect being to curse anything? Is it moral for God to allow Satan to have dominion over the earth, as most of Christianity teaches? Is it moral for a perfect and loving and maximally great God to allow demons to possess and attack people, even if that's so God could reveal his power by driving them out? How unnecessary is that? That doesn't demonstrate perfection. It demonstrates a flawed design. Play along here. I'm granting that demons exist. Is it wrong for a perfect, maximally great God to have not fine-tuned his word well enough to avoid having it lead some to religious trauma and become terrified of this God and have their lives and mental health overwhelmed and disrupted? In what universe would we call any of this good, wholesome, appropriate, necessary, and praiseworthy? In what universe does this all sound perfect and that these actions emanate from a perfectly good being? This is why I have to ask again, what is Christianity's definition of perfect, of good, of maximally great, of moral, of holy? Here's a quick bonus thought for you to chew on, Christians, not to get too far off topic, but did God become Satan? Think of the crucifixion. If Jesus took on all sin of the world, past, present, and future, if he became all sin the moment of his crucifixion, as Christianity teaches, and Jesus and the Father are one, how did God in that moment not become all evil? How in that moment did God, or at least Jesus, if you believe there's some separation between the persons of the Trinity, not become as bad or worse than Satan? And if Jesus' death was meant to conquer all sin and evil, then why do we still have a devil in our earthly existence? Shouldn't the crucifixion have blotted out the devil? If God is the source of all things, and Psalms tells us that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, and the Bible tells us that in Isaiah, God is responsible for creating all the good and the evil in the world, and if per Trent, only goodness can flow from God, because only goodness can emanate from God's nature, then none of us can make a claim about what is good and what is evil, what is right and what is wrong. Everything just is what it is, and if it flows from God, then no matter what, as we've already established, it has to be good. But we know from Isaiah 45:7 that evil flows from God's nature. But let's give Trent and Christian theologians and apologists what they want and need, which is a perfectly good, maximally great God, capable only of goodness and love. Then, since Satan's very existence and his perpetuation in our earthly reality and dominion over this world is God's design, meaning God allows it, orchestrates it, and ordains it, we have to consider it good. When my therapist said to me years ago that God doesn't need evil to accomplish his plans, he absolutely does. But I think the real flaw in my therapist's statement could be that there's no such thing as evil under that line of thinking. Christians will often say that evil is a privation of good. Is Satan's existence, sustenance, dominion, and influence a privation of good, since we've already established that God allows it, orchestrates it, ordains it, and needs it in order for his salvation-damnation paradigm to make any sense, and only goodness can emanate from God's perfect nature? Satan, as pure evil, is not a privation, but rather God's intention. Otherwise, we wouldn't have him in our daily existence. If you think that God has nothing to do with Satan, that they're independent agents acting independently, and that God must battle Satan for final dominance in existence, you're giving Satan a whole lot of credit and stripping God of his credit, the credit he wants for making our reality the way he's made it. You're robbing God of his sovereignty and omniscience. Remember, God could have blotted Satan out the moment Satan sinned in heaven, as the story goes, but he didn't. In God's moral perfection and maximal greatness, in his all-perfect love and goodness, he sent Satan and his demons to earth, where they are free to prowl around and corrupt, and as Jesus told Peter, sift us like wheat. That's nice. So not only does someone like me have to worry about earthly predators like my molester, I now have to contend with spiritual warfare and the like through Satan and his demons. I have to battle against the spiritual forces of darkness, as the Bible declares in Ephesians. This is not what we'd expect from an all-perfect, all-loving, maximally great being with only great-making properties, out of which only goodness can flow. This is what we'd expect from a God with evil tendencies, or at best, human tendencies. And for all you Christians who have been screaming, free will, free will, free will at me since this video started, let's address free will. The argument goes that God doesn't demand or coerce our love. He wants us to freely give it. And in order to do that, we must have choice. And in order to have choice, we must have a range of options from good to bad, or right to wrong, or righteous to evil. So already you have to concede that under that premise, evil is God's idea. He needs it to exist so that we have options or choices. And from there, we can conclude that the perpetuation of Satan in our earthly existence is and must be God's idea out of necessity. How is this moral? How is this maximally great? Especially when God already knows that a majority of humans will in fact be deceived under this paradigm. How is it good that the very thing Christians believe we need to be protected from is the very thing God perpetuates in our reality to manipulate, influence, and trip us up at every turn? And if you tell me that man's heart is wicked from the start and is the reason for all the sin and corruption and childhood sexual abuse and murder and rape and other things like that, then why do we even need a devil in our earthly existence? Make that make sense. And finally, an argument we've heard before, but it completely debunks this whole free will argument Christians think justifies the evil and suffering problem. Christians believe we'll have some form of free will in heaven, yet we don't need evil and suffering there, nor do we need God to sustain an evil agent there to operationalize that free will. So Trent and every other Christian apologist and theologian, contend with this. Contend with Satan's existence and perpetuation in our earthly reality in light of God's perfection, goodness, and maximum greatness. Make it make sense. If you want me to believe something is perfect, perfectly good and loving and maximally great and pure holiness, then I should not and would not see, not even for a second, that thing orchestrating and sustaining ultimate evil in our reality. Nor would I see that thing ensure that a sin nature is inherited down through every generation. That is not perfect, that is not good, and that is not maximally great. I'm open to hearing responses to this. I've never heard a good one, but I'm open. Thanks for spending some time with me, you guys. If you want to support this channel, please like, subscribe, share, comment, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss my next conversation starter. But a way to support the channel financially, since I don't have Patreons or sponsors, is to do what many others have done and purchase my memoir, On Monsters and Phantoms. It's, again, my memoir about severe religious trauma and deconversion from Christianity, and leave a review. It's a raw and honest look into the diabolically harmful mind games Christianity plays with us. The link to it on Amazon is below. I appreciate that. If you do buy it, let me know via email in addition to a comment so I can publicly thank you in my next video. And by the way, if you're on the fence about whether or not to read my memoir, head over to onmonstersandphantoms.com. Right there on the homepage are lots of reader reviews. This isn't an easy read, I'm just telling you that now, but hopefully others can help you know what to expect and how it can help. And yes, my family is still going through a medical crisis, as I've been talking about. So if you're able to donate to the GoFundMe page my friend Cody of the Peel the Onion channel set up, the link is in the description. Many of you have already donated, and man, am I so thankful and grateful. I'm respecting privacy right now, so I can't tell you much more about it, but hopefully someday I will. So look for new videos each Wednesday and Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, where we take a deep dive into what religious trauma is, how it forms, in whom it's most likely to form, and what we can do about it if it does form. If you'd like me to cover a specific topic, let me know in the comments. And if you're new here and curious about religious trauma, or think you may be suffering from it, and I hope you're not, first of all, welcome. Then explore the channel to see what other topics I've covered. and what resources are available to you. And if you haven't yet subscribed and you're here right now, would you please take a second and do so? Thank you so much. We're coming up on our 1-year anniversary in January, and I have some big plans in 2026 that I'd love for you to be a part of. More on that in early January. From my understanding of new channels on YouTube, to reach 1,000 subscribers in year one is very good and very difficult to achieve. We're at just around 2,310 currently, so thank you so much for your support. I'm so happy to see so many of you joining me in this critically important topic, a topic I don't think we spend nearly enough time talking about. Okay, until next time, let's continue to catalyze a conversation about religious trauma to let those who suffer from it know that there's real hope, and to let those who dismiss it know that it's real.